I shouldn't have noticed the way she looked at me in the rain. That's the part I keep replaying. Not the storm, not the hospital, not even the trip to the coast. It was the look, like she already knew something I didn't. You ever have a moment where you realize the line between family and stranger just shifted under your feet? That was mine. She was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, soaked, not moving. And when I called her name, something changed in her eyes before she even walked toward me. I told myself it was concern. That's what a decent person does. You see someone hurting, you step in. But that wasn't the whole truth. Because when she walked into my house that night, water dripping onto my hallway floor, something inside me felt awake. And that scared me. She had been my stepmother once. 3 years. Then she wasn't. Then she was just Sandra from 3 houses down. Safe, defined, distant. But sitting across from her at my kitchen table, watching her hold that coffee mug like it was the only solid thing in the world, I didn't feel distance. I felt protective. And that's not the same thing. When she told me about her mom collapsing, her voice steady like she'd practiced it, I didn't think. I just grabbed my keys. That wasn't like me. I calculate, I plan. I stay in my lane. But that night I stepped out of it. In the car, when she mentioned her husband and the music he used to play, something tight moved in my chest. Not jealousy. Not exactly. Just awareness. She had a whole life before this street. Before my dad. Before me. And suddenly I wanted to know all of it. At the hospital parking lot. When she asked if I would wait, she didn't look desperate. She looked hopeful. Like she was testing whether I'd stay. And I did. I didn't check my phone. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there. Because for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't just my neighbor. She was someone choosing me. And when she came back to the car, eyes heavier than before, and said she couldn't get in the car alone that night, something settled between us. Not romance. Not yet. But something dangerous in its quietness. And when she thanked me for not making her explain herself, I realized I wanted to be the person she didn't have to explain herself to. That's when it started. Not the beach trip. Not the letter, not the wine on the porch. It started in that rain. And I don't think either of us understood what we were stepping into. I told myself I was just being kind. That's what normal people do when someone loses their mother. They check in. They offer rides. They don't think about how the other person's voice sounds. Softer at 6:40 in the morning. But I was thinking about it. 4 days after the hospital, her curtains hadn't moved. I noticed. I hated that I noticed. Every morning when I walked Biscuit past her house, I looked without meaning to. Porch light still on. Car still there. No movement. I stood at the edge of her walkway once. Hand in my jacket pocket. Heart beating harder than it should for something so small. Knocking would have been easy. Walking away was harder. I didn't know what she needed, space. Or proof someone would cross it. That uncertainty sat in my chest all day. Then Saturday came. 3 quiet knocks at my door. When I opened it, she looked smaller somehow. Gray sweatshirt, no makeup, eyes tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. I made banana bread, she said. I don't even like banana bread. I almost smiled at that. It wasn't about bread. It was about not being alone with her thoughts. She sat at my kitchen table again. Same chair as the first night, like she'd memorized it. Biscuit rested his chin on her knee and she let him. That softness came back to her face, and I felt it again, that pull. She told me her mom remembered her name before she died. Not at first. But then she did. There was pride in her voice, and hurt, and something unresolved. When she talked about 11 years of silence between them, I felt this strange urge to fix it, but you can't fix time. So I just listened, and that's when she asked me, "Did you ever feel weird about me living down the street?" My chest tightened. That was the real question. Not about the house, not about the past, about us. I could have lied, said it was fine, easy. But something about the way she watched me told me she'd know. At first, I said slowly, "I didn't know what you were to me anymore." Her expression didn't break. It softened, like I'd handed her honesty instead of comfort. And when she left that day, she walked differently, less guarded. And I stood in my hallway realizing something I hadn't admitted yet. I wasn't just worried about her. I was starting to wait for her. And that felt like a line I wasn't sure I was allowed to cross. The first time she texted me first, my hands hesitated over the screen. "Soup's ready if you haven't eaten." Back porch. No punctuation, no emoji, just that. It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Because it meant she thought of me before dinner, and that small detail did something to my breathing. I told myself to calm down. It was soup, not a love letter. Her back porch smelled like rosemary and damp wood. The string lights were already on, even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. She must have turned them on early. For comfort, she handed me a bowl without ceremony. Our fingers brushed for half a second, too quick to be intentional, long enough to register. I felt it. She sat across from me, blanket over her knees, wine already poured. "My husband built those garden beds," she said, nodding toward the overgrown wood frames behind her. She didn't look at me when she said husband. I kept my face neutral. That word still belonged to someone else, and that awareness created distance, a necessary one. "He killed most of what he planted," she added quietly. That made me smile. I could picture it. Someone trying, failing, trying again. "He sounds stubborn," I said. "He was," she replied, in the best way. Something tightened inside me then. Not anger, not jealousy, just comparison. I didn't want to be measured against a memory. That uncertainty flickered fast. But then she told me about Lily. Her daughter, 17, sharp, stubborn, calls every other Sunday. When she smiled talking about her, it wasn't polite. It was real. And that smile reached somewhere I didn't expect. I realized I'd never seen her unguarded before this week. Not once in 2 years. Now she was offering pieces of herself like she'd decided I could hold them. That responsibility felt heavier than attraction. It felt earned. We talked for 2 hours. Nothing dramatic. No confessions. Just layers peeling slowly. At one point she laughed at something I said. A real laugh. Head tilted back slightly, eyes closed for a second. And I had to look away, because the warmth of it felt too good. On the drive back from the coast later, I would remember that laugh. Because that was the moment I stopped pretending this was just kindness. Something was shifting, and I didn't know if either of us was ready for what that meant. When she called at 6:40 in the morning, I already knew. Some hours only bring one kind of news. Her voice was steady. Too steady. "She's gone." No build-up. No softness around it. Just the truth. And for a second, I hated how calm she sounded. Like she was protecting me from the weight of it. "I'm coming over," I said. "You don't have to." "I know." That word felt important. When I walked into her kitchen, the house was silent in a way that didn't feel natural, like she'd turned the world down on purpose. She was sitting at the table, green robe, mug in both hands. She didn't look broken. She looked braced. I sat across from her. We didn't speak for a while, and that silence didn't feel awkward. It felt shared. That scared me a little, because I realized I didn't want to be anywhere else. When she told me about the letter her mom had written, the one she hadn't opened yet, her fingers hovered over it like it might burn. "I don't want to read it alone," she said. There were other people in her life, a sister, a daughter, but she chose me. That word echoed louder than it should have. I felt the weight of it. Not romantic, not yet, but intimate in a way that mattered. When she read parts of the letter out loud, her voice cracked on the word proud. Just once. I wanted to reach across the table. I didn't. That restraint felt important. After she folded the pages back up, she stared at the window. She always said the rain brings people together when they need it most. She said it quietly, not as a joke, not as a metaphor, as something she was trying to believe. And I felt that night replay in my mind, her standing still, me calling her name. If I hadn't looked up at that exact second, if I'd run straight inside, would we still be strangers? The thought unsettled me, because suddenly this didn't feel random. It felt like timing, and timing can be dangerous. When she said she needed to leave town for a few days, I understood before she finished explaining. Then she looked at me. "Will you come?" My heart didn't race. It steadied, like it had already decided, and I said yes without thinking about what that yes meant. But later that night, lying in bed, I finally did, and I wasn't sure I liked the answer. The motel had thin walls and a flickering ice machine. Not romantic, not dramatic, just ordinary, and somehow that made it more dangerous. We had separate rooms. That was her idea. She said it casually when we checked in, like it had already been decided in her head. I agreed too quickly, because I needed the boundary. That first evening, we walked along the beach while the sky turned orange and then gray. The wind pushed her hair across her face and she didn't fix it right away. She looked lighter. Grief hadn't left her, but it had shifted. "I thought I'd fall apart," she said quietly, eyes on the water. "But I mostly just feel tired." "That makes sense," I said. She looked at me then. Really looked. "You don't try to fix things," she said. It wasn't criticism. It was something softer. I shrugged. I wouldn't know how. She smiled at that, and for a second, the air between us warmed. Later on the balcony, the ocean loud but steady. She wrapped a blanket around her legs. I brought out 2 bad cups of motel coffee. She laughed when she tasted it. "That's awful." "Yeah," I said. "But it's honest." She looked at me again in that quiet way, the way that makes you feel seen longer than you expected. We talked about nothing important, old road trips, bad decisions in our 20s, Her year in New Mexico. My friendship I never repaired. There was ease. And that scared me more than tension would have. Because ease can turn into something else if you're not careful. At one point the wind shifted and she moved closer to hear me better. Just an inch. But I felt it. The space between us got smaller. And my body reacted before my mind did. I shifted back slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to protect something. She noticed. I know she did. Her eyes flickered for half a second. Not hurt. Just awareness. That was the moment the uncertainty crept in. Were we leaning towards something? Or were we just two lonely people holding the same quiet? When we said goodnight outside our rooms, she hesitated. "Thank you for coming," she said. There was more under it. I felt it. But neither of us reached for it. I closed my door and stood there in the dark longer than I should have, because I knew something had changed on that balcony. Not loudly, not recklessly, but enough. And I wasn't sure whether stepping forward would feel like courage or betrayal. I barely slept that night, not because of the motel bed, because of the almost. That inch she moved closer on the balcony. That half-second pause before we said goodnight. I kept replaying it, and the worst part, I wanted to know what would have happened if I hadn't stepped back. The next morning we walked to a small diner near the pier. Cheap coffee. Sticky tables. The kind of place that doesn't rush you out. She looked calmer, not happier, just clearer. Grief had settled into something steadier. We talked about her mom's letter again. Not the heavy parts, just one line. She wrote that she mistook my strength for not needing anyone. Sandra said it quietly, stirring her coffee. That's the part that won't leave me. I didn't answer right away, because I had done the same thing. For 2 years, I'd seen her as composed, self-contained, untouchable. I never considered that maybe she was just carrying everything alone. You don't have to be strong all the time, I said finally. She looked up. And you don't have to stay detached all the time, she replied. That landed, harder than it should have, because she wasn't just talking about grief, she was talking about me. There it was. The shift. We drove back that afternoon. Windows cracked, ocean fading behind us. The silence in the car wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. At one point she rested her hand on the center console between us, not reaching for me, just resting, close enough that I was aware of it the entire time. I didn't move my hand closer. But I didn't pull away either. When we reached our street, 3 houses felt like nothing. And everything. She unbuckled slowly. "Thank you," she said again. But this time her voice held something else. Not just gratitude, trust, and maybe curiosity. I watched her walk up her driveway. She didn't look back. But she didn't rush inside either. That night, lying in my own bed again, the distance between our houses felt shorter than it ever had. And for the first time, I wasn't confused about what I was feeling. I was just afraid of it, because wanting someone is simple. Wanting someone who used to be family, that's complicated. And complications have consequences. 3 houses. That's all it was. 3 houses and a history neither of us talked about. After the trip, I expected things to feel awkward. They didn't. That was the problem. They felt natural. Too natural. She came over a week later to help me fix the crooked shelf in my hallway. It had been leaning for months. I kept meaning to fix it. Never did. She stood on a chair. I held the shelf steady. At one point, she lost her balance slightly and grabbed my shoulder. Just instinct. Her hand stayed there a second longer than necessary. We both noticed. She stepped down quickly. "Your dad never fixed anything either," she said lightly. It was the first time she'd mentioned him in weeks. I watched her face carefully. No bitterness. No tension. Just memory. I laughed. Yeah, that tracks. We stood there in the hallway closer than we needed to be. The air felt different. Not heavy. Not innocent either. "Marcus," she said quietly. It was the first time she'd said my name like that. Not calling across rain, not asking for help, just saying it. And I felt it in my chest. "I've been thinking," she continued. That sentence can go 100 directions. My heart tightened. About us. There it was. I didn't interrupt. Didn't breathe much either. "I don't know what this is," she said honestly. "But I don't want to pretend it's nothing." That vulnerability shifted everything. Because I had been pretending. Pretending it was kindness. Pretending it was proximity. Pretending it wasn't the way I looked for her porch light at night. "I don't want to pretend either," I admitted. Saying it out loud felt like stepping onto thin ice. She studied my face, searching for hesitation, maybe guilt. "Does it feel wrong to you?" she asked softly. There was the uncertainty. The real one. I thought about my dad, about labels, about what people might say. And then I thought about that rainstorm, about her choosing me to read the letter, about the way she laughs when she forgets to be careful. "It feels complicated," I said. She nodded. "Complicated I can handle." And then she reached for my hand. Slow. Intentional. Not testing. Not accidental. And I let her. That was the moment. Not dramatic. Not reckless. Just two people deciding not to step back this time. But even as her fingers tightened around mine, one quiet fear stayed in the room. What happens when complicated stops feeling manageable? The first time we held hands, nothing exploded. No lightning. No dramatic music. Just warmth. And the terrifying awareness that we had crossed something we couldn't uncross. Her fingers were steady in mine. Mine weren't. She noticed. "You're shaking," she said softly. "I know." That made her smile. Not teasing. Relieved. Like she needed proof this wasn't one-sided. We didn't kiss. That would have been easier. Clearer. Instead, we stood in my hallway holding hands like two people learning a new language. Slowly. Carefully. Later that night she texted, "Are we being reckless?" I stared at the message longer than I should have, because the honest answer wasn't simple. I typed, deleted, typed again. "I don't think so. I think we're being honest." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then came back. Honest can still hurt people. There it was, the fear of consequences. My dad, her daughter, the neighbors who already waved too politely. I felt the weight of all of them pressing into the quiet between our houses. But I also felt the truth. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't born from grief alone. It had been building for weeks, maybe years. We just hadn't been brave enough to look at it. The next evening she came over again. Not with food, not with a project, just herself. We sat on my couch, close but not touching. That night in the rain, she said, eyes on the floor. I wasn't just frozen because of my mom. I waited. I felt like I was alone in everything. And when you called my name, I didn't feel alone for the first time in a long while. That confession shifted something deeper, because it meant I wasn't just a witness. I was part of the change. I reached for her hand again. This time I didn't hesitate. She leaned her head against my shoulder. Slow. Intentional. My heart pounded so loud I was sure she could hear it. "You don't feel like my past," she whispered. "You feel like now." That should have eased me. Instead, it made the stakes real. Because now means future, and future means explaining. Facing people. Choosing publicly. I kissed her forehead. Gentle. Careful. And even in that softness I knew something important. We weren't just exploring feelings anymore. We were deciding whether to stand in the rain together, or run before anyone saw. The first person who saw us was Mrs. Caldwell across the street. Of course it was. She times her gardening around everyone else's business. Sandra and I were standing too close in my driveway. Not touching, just close enough to tell a story if someone wanted one. Mrs. Caldwell wanted one. Her eyes lingered. Sandra noticed before I did. "That didn't take long," she murmured. I felt something protective rise in me. Not shame. Not exactly. But awareness. This wasn't private anymore. That evening, Sandra sat at my kitchen table. Hands wrapped around a glass of water instead of wine. "I need to tell Lily," she said. There it was. The real test. Her daughter, 17, sharp, observant. "What if she thinks I'm replacing something?" Sandra continued. "Or worse, crossing a line?" The doubt in her voice cut deeper than gossip ever could. I moved closer but didn't touch her yet. "She deserves the truth," I said carefully. "But she also deserves to see you happy." Sandra's jaw tightened. "Happiness isn't always simple." "No," I agreed. "But hiding isn't either." That landed between us. We had built something honest. Hiding it would change its shape. Later that night, she called Lily. She put it on speaker halfway through because her hands were shaking. I stayed quiet. I could only hear Lily's side faintly, but I caught enough. Long pause. A sigh. "Is he kind to you?" That was the first question. Not about age. Not about history. Not about what it looked like. Kind. Sandra's eyes met mine. "Yes," she said softly. "He is." Another pause. Then Lily's voice, clearer this time. "Okay, then I trust you." The relief that hit Sandra was visible. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing changed. After the call ended, she covered her face with both hands. "She didn't yell," she whispered. "You expected her to?" "A little." I sat beside her, and this time I did pull her into me. No hesitation. No stepping back. But even in that warmth, something lingered. Because acceptance from Lily was one thing. My dad was another, and we hadn't said his name yet. Sandra leaned against me and said quietly, "We can't keep pretending he won't matter." She was right, and the moment she said it, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't afraid of gossip. I was afraid of hurting him, and I didn't know which fear would win when the time came. I thought telling my dad would be the breaking point. I was wrong. The breaking point was the silence before he spoke. We met at a small barbecue place outside Austin. Neutral ground. No memories attached. Sandra didn't come. This was mine to say. I didn't build it up, didn't soften it. I've been seeing Sandra, I said. He didn't react at first, just wiped his hands on a napkin. How long? He asked calmly. A few weeks. He nodded once, not angry, not surprised, just thinking. That almost made it harder. I should probably feel something dramatic about that, he said after a moment. But I don't. I blinked. He looked at me directly. Marcus, when Sandra and I ended, we ended. She's not my past to manage anymore. Relief flooded me too fast, but it didn't erase everything. I don't want to hurt you, I said. He leaned back in his chair. Son, the only way you hurt me is if you treat her poorly. Or if you hide. That word again. Hide. He wasn't asking for explanations. He wasn't accusing. He was trusting, and that hit deeper than anger would have. When I told Sandra later, she went quiet. Are you okay? I asked. I just expected it to be harder, she admitted. So did I. We stood on her back porch that evening. The same porch with the gas station wine and the crooked garden beds. It was about to rain again. You could smell it in the air. She stepped closer, not hesitant this time. Maybe my mom was right, she said softly. About the rain. I smiled. About it bringing people together? She nodded. It didn't just bring us together. It made us choose. That was the difference. We weren't caught anymore. We were deciding. The first drops started falling. Light. Slow. She didn't move away. Neither did I. 2 years of distance. One storm that changed everything. And now another one beginning. But this time we weren't standing apart on the sidewalk. We were standing side by side. She looked up at me. No uncertainty left. Marcus, she said, voice steady. I don't want to be careful with you anymore. That wasn't reckless. It was clear. And as the rain started to fall harder around us, I realized something simple. It was never about being trapped together. It was about choosing to stay.